Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as I now want to dive into a little bit of news that broke this afternoon in the NFL, and that is from, of course, ESPN's Ian Rappaport, that tweeted out about how Russell Wilson, quote, "if all goes well, likely ends this week as a full participant, and Justin Fields continues to start." So, very interesting situation there in Pittsburgh, where going back to this offseason, I mean, we've rehashed this topic a number of times throughout, the offseason and headed into this season, that you're talking about two quarterbacks in Pittsburgh that are getting fresh starts there. So the organization really has no extensive ties to either one of them. And they brought in both options because they knew they needed to reshuffle their quarterback room after what was a messy situation last year with Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph. So they now bring in Wilson and Fields, and Wilson ended up winning the starting job at the, coming out of training camp. Really, more than anything, I've talked about it before, I feel like it was more so as a result of the fact that Wilson was brought in first and he was maybe guaranteed a starting spot a little bit more than Fields, who a few weeks later the Steelers decided to trade for at a pretty low price. And I think that Mike Tomlin and the Steelers organization, all things considered, is one of the more well-run franchises in the NFL, and maybe more respectable in terms of Tomlin feels like he is more of a player's coach and he's a man of his word, and all things considered there. I feel like it was, I always said that I thought that Justin Fields would be the better man for the job in this Steelers offense, where they aren't exactly extremely talented on the front line. I've talked about a number of times that the offensive line is an issue to me, that we are looking at a situation where you have one, I would say, good receiver. And, George Pickens is very talented. Sometimes he does stuff on the field, like the fumble that he had, reaching out for a first down that was just a little bit boneheaded. And that was on second down as well, so it's not like it was a do-or-die situation. He fumbles there in the red zone. Then just a couple drives later, he does sort of try to do the same thing. That there are frustrating parts to George Pickens' game, but all things considered, he's still massively talented. He finished this game with 7 receptions for 113 yards, so he's really good. Outside of that, though, really don't have much from a receiving standpoint. Get some production from your tight ends. Pat Freiermuth ended up having a pretty decent game for himself this past Sunday. Freiermuth has always been somebody that I've been a fan of, but from a wide receiver standpoint, it's largely lackluster. And Justin Fields is somebody who can at least create more with his legs. Russell Wilson, obviously, he's made a career off of using his legs, extending plays, and then making throws downfield. So it's not that he's incapable of doing it, but I think at this point, with Wilson's age, he is at a point where he's not going to be running a heavy dose of quarterback-designed runs. He's 35 years old, turning 36 in November, as opposed to Justin Fields, who is, at a point where his career is still so unproven as of now, at least in the eyes of a lot of people. He is a first-round bust. Now, a lot of people are also blaming Chicago for that, which I do agree with in large part. I think that Justin Fields is a flawed quarterback, but I do ultimately think that there's a lot of talent there and that he has a chance to be able to resurrect himself in Pittsburgh. And now that he seems to have a little bit more of a competent coaching staff around him, which is kind of crazy to phrase it like that when you're talking about, Arthur Smith is also his offensive coordinator, who I've always stood by. Arthur Smith isn't a bad offensive coordinator. I thought he did a very good job when he was in Tennessee. Now, obviously, in over his head when he was in Atlanta. So that's sort of besides the point there. But he has him, he has Tomlin, and it feels like there's just a lot more of a structure. And the Steelers, especially in comparison to the Bears, are just a franchise that appears to know a lot more about, actually developing players and tailoring a game to their skill sets and putting the necessary pieces in place. Again, it's not like right now the Steelers are some elite offense where Justin Fields has weapons galore, which is kind of more so the case in Chicago right now, and their offense is still dysfunctional. But the Steelers have been able to sort of weed out a lot of the mistakes from Justin Fields and are sort of gradually here taking the training wheels off and letting him do more. He finishes with 312 yards and a touchdown in the game this past weekend. Now, did have a very costly fumble in this game in the third quarter that ended up, sort of going against them. But I think all things considered, you are seeing the growth from Justin Fields in this situation. And as much as Mike Tomlin, I'm sure, feels like to some degree he would prefer to sort of stand by whatever, word he gave to Russell Wilson when Wilson first signed with them. And I do think that, Tomlin is going to find a way to make things right, at least to some degree. I'm sure internally, and especially in that front office, they would very much prefer that Justin Fields does emerge for this job and can be somebody for them that is a franchise caliber quarterback, even if it is, just signing maybe a little bit of a Baker Mayfield type contract. Now, $100 million for what Fields has given you on the field right now feels very extreme, and I don't think it would be to that extent, but I think that Fields could probably, be in the market of whatever Sam Darnold is going to get. Darnold has been the better quarterback as of up to this point in the season. But again, I think we're seeing real, growth from Fields. I feel like he is probably going to be a little bit more okay with now being in this situation in Pittsburgh. Now that, assuming he starts the rest of the season, which is sort of where I'm anticipating this to happen, or the direction that this is going to go, I feel like Fields will probably be okay with maybe even taking a little bit less than what a Sam Darnold gets, just to have maybe a 2-3 year deal here with Pittsburgh where he can continue to develop. Because Fields is still very young. He's 25 years old. So he can even afford to just guarantee himself another few years in the league and still develop on who he is. Now, we'll see what the overall level of production that Fields can, produce at this point moving forward in this year. But I think that Fields makes them a very competitive team moving forward. And it's just about eliminating those mistakes. Like I mentioned, has a turnover in each of the past 2 weeks. That's what you really don't want to see, especially because that fumble from him in this game against the Colts did come at a pretty costly time for them, where I want to double check here, but it was in the third quarter as the Steelers were trying to, mount a little bit more of a comeback, and they were competitive at the end of this game. I mean, they had the ball with a few minutes left in the game in a 3-point game. But ultimately, Fields just wasn't able to sort of pull this one out, and that's all right. We're still looking at, baby steps here, and he's somebody who's been in the league now for 4 years. That it's not a great sign necessarily. The bar has definitely been reset to a much lower level. But again, I feel like at somebody just 25 years old, there is still a significant amount of time to be able to, take steps towards being the right direction. You look at Sam Darnold, where I can double check here, but this is now his 7th year in the NFL, and it's his 7th year in the NFL at this point. He's still 27 years old. So, if he can make it work, given everything that he's been through, I still feel like there is a very real path to sort of making Justin Fields into a positive starting quarterback once again. Now, it's going to, maybe take a little bit of patience from the Steelers, and I think that they're okay with that also because, no, the defense didn't necessarily show up in this game in particular, but the defense is good enough as well that that's what Steelers fans and the Steelers organization themselves can sort of hang their hat on. And, again, just have a quarterback that provides a certain skill set that they can capitalize on and have an identity on that offensive side of the ball, which they've really been lacking these past few seasons. I've mentioned, dating back to the older version of Ben Roethlisberger that we got, that they haven't really had a great quarterback. They just haven't gotten great quarterback play in a handful of years. And the Steelers are hoping to be able to make the playoffs and actually capitalize on the situation, win their first playoff game since 2016. Is Fields the man for that job yet? As of week 4, I would say no. But as he continues to get more and more comfortable in this situation, I think that he can. And on the other end of this as well, Russell Wilson, I feel like it's very likely that we do see, like I mentioned, Mike Tomlin try and make things right with him, send him to a situation where he can start, specifically looking at a Miami, probably, maybe. Miami really does make sense as the one team, I think, that could really benefit from him now. There are other teams that need quarterbacks. Like, I think that the Titans do. I think that the Raiders do. I'm not sure if Russell Wilson is a starter week 1 there, or if their aspirations are necessarily to win playoff games like that. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's more of just a statement on where Russell Wilson is at this point in his career. And this might be it, which would be unfortunate because Russell Wilson is one of the more fun players in NFL, in recent NFL history. 2010s at that quarterback position, had a lot of great moments, but it just might be time for him. But we are going to, switch gears here to another team in that same division in the AFC North, where the Cincinnati Bengals were able to win their first game of the season against the Carolina Panthers. So we are going to be diving into that game, what it means for the Bengals moving forward. But first, we're going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.